So hello and welcome to Access Matters. My name is Rebecca Potts and I head up the Access Matters initiative for Vulio, Response Source and Pulsar. We launched Access Matters over a year ago to encourage listening, sharing of experience, learning from best practice and collaboration on the actions that will have the greatest positive impact for our industry. Today we're joined by the incredible Asad Dhunna, founder and CEO of The Unmistakables. Good morning, Asad.
Hey Rebecca, nice to see you.
Hi. So Asad will talk about why he felt the industry needed a consultancy dedicated to inclusivity and practical ways to bring inclusion into organisations and campaigns. A true inspiration, Asad is recognised as a marketing industry changemaker and regularly speaks on issues relating to diversity, inclusion and creating more equal organisations. So before I hand over to Asad, I'd like to remind everyone that we are encouraging engagement, so please do submit questions using the Q&A tab on your screen or in the chat box for all to see. And also please feel free to join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag accessmatters. You might have noticed that we've also got live captions. They're enabled by Zoom, so hopefully they'll be reasonably accurate, but they're there for all and they'll be on the recording too. So before we begin, as with our previous sessions, we're going to be running a poll, but this time we're asking, do you feel included in your organisation? I'm going to launch that now. There we go. So it's anonymous, but we'd love you all to take part so we can look at the results later. But for now, it's over to you, Asad.
Thanks very much, Rebecca, and nice to be here. So I guess starting with who am I? Why are you taking your time today to listen to me and have a chat with me? So I tried to do introductions without giving the potted history of I worked here and then I worked there and then I did this and then I did that. Because I think to introduce yourself without all of that presents sometimes a bit of a challenge of how do you introduce yourself. And I think in meetings we all go in and go, hello, I'm so-and-so and I do this at this business. And what that does is put a mask up, right? And it says, this is who you should see me as and this is who I want to present as. So I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm going to just give you a bit of a potted history about who I am as a person and how I've got to the place that I've got to. So I think throughout my life, I've recognised that I haven't really fit in wherever I've been. And the first place I realised that was when I was 5 years old at school and at primary school. And I remember so clearly being sat there and someone said, oh, Asad, it's your turn to come in. And I said, oh, who's Asad? I don't know who that is, because at home, the way that my family pronounces my name is Asad. And Asad is the, I guess, the more Urdu or Hindi way of saying my name, because A's have more of a U sound. But to process that has been different. So the pronunciation of my name made me think, oh, hang on, who I am at home and who I am in the world is different. I was only 5 years old trying to work that out. And I guess I co-opted Asad because it was easier when I call people to book a restaurant or just to go about my day-to-day business. It's easier to say Asad because I can spell A-S-A-D. People hear it. I guess the president of Syria had something to do with that, where everyone now knows the name a bit more in the public consciousness, but mine is one S and two. And I found that if I say Asad, people are like, oh, is that a U? Or how do I really spell that? So that feeling of being different has always been there, and it followed me throughout my education. So I, for my A-levels, did German and French and economics, and I had lots of people saying, why are you doing languages? What's that about? Shouldn't you be doing sciences, or shouldn't you be doing maths? Like, that's what people expect you to do. And I just did it because I was really interested. I really liked languages. I was reasonably good at it, so I wanted to continue that study. And then when I got to the opportunity to go to university and apply, I had people saying, well, obviously you'll do accountancy, or you'll do law, or you'll do something that's expected of someone like you. And I was going, what do you mean someone like me? And I think I realised they were saying, well, Asian people and people of Indian heritage, what you go off and do. So I went off and did German and business studies. So the business studies kind of appealed to what I should be doing. And the German kept my passion there, and I absolutely loved it. And then that feeling of not fitting in carried on. I lived in Germany for a year. I really didn't fit in there because people were wondering, well, where are you from? And I'd say, well, I'm from England or from Britain. They're like, no, but where are you really from? Because the idea that I could be brown and have a British accent and have a British passport was like, well, how does that qualify with who you are? And I think Germany has a very different integration and immigration story with Turkey and with the war that has meant that the way that they see nationality is a bit different. So I found that stuck with me. And then I got to the point of, well, I've got to do a job now and get some money, and went off and worked in the world of marketing and communications, which again was well, should you really be doing that? And I had two forces at play. I had the push and pull. So I had the push of my family saying, well, really, like maybe you could get a job in a bank. And then I had the pull of, well, actually, do people like me belong in this industry, and should I really be here? And so I was just grappling with that. But I think part youth, part belligerence, part pure dedication. I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to stick in it in the industry and work my way through different agencies. So I've worked at a number of different places, from small independent ones to big global ones. Most recently at Weber Shandwick, which is a big PR and communications agency that many people might know of. And as I was progressing through my career, I guess I'd always been contending with the not fitting in bit, but was trying to use it more as a value rather than as a bad thing. So if I'm different, maybe I can see things in a different way, or maybe I'm understanding things differently. And then I started to realize that as I was becoming a leader in the business and sitting on boards, people didn't necessarily look like me or have the same experiences that I had. And I started to question, well, what was that about? And I think this is at the time where kind of 2015, 2016, people were using terms like ERG, so employee resource groups. They were talking about the BAME network, the LGBT network, the faith network, the working parents network. And I had this funny moment where someone said, do you want to be part of the BAME network or the LGBT network? As a gay Muslim and gay Indian man, or man of an Indian heritage, I was like, well, where do I fit? And these networks, you didn't get paid to go in them. You spent your time there extracurricular. And I didn't fit in either of these. And then someone told me about the word intersectional, and then that became somehow I just got really curious about who I was and how I didn't fit in, blended with my career and being a leader in a business. And then that was happening for me internally. And then what was happening with my clients was conversations of, well, how do we understand different communities? How do we understand the BAME community? What does that even mean? How do we understand the LGBT community? And I was associated with organising Pride in London, so I was getting a bit of insight into how that all worked. And I thought, well, I could either keep feeling a bit frustrated that I feel like an odd one out and the tables I'm sitting and these opportunities are getting missed, or I could do something about it. And I guess people who look like me are more likely to set up a shop on the high street rather than a shop that works in advertising and marketing, now culture change, but decided I'd give it a go and took the leap to set up The Unmistakables, and that was back in 2018. So now I'm known as the founder and the CEO of the company, and it was really just taking a leap to go, well, could we do something about this? How could we make the world more inclusive, and how could we accelerate inclusion for ourselves, for our clients, for society as a whole? And so back in 2018, when we were starting, we were having conversations with clients about, how do I get this right? What should this look like in the business? And I think diversity and inclusion was treated really differently to how it's treated today. And I put that down to a couple of things. One is I think people have progressed and become more advanced, but I also think the pandemic and George Floyd's murder were two moments in time that caused us all to sit up and listen and get engaged in the conversation. Partially because we were all at home and we had nothing else to do but look at our screens and talk about it, but partially because we all went through the same experience, and we then saw how people were going through the same experience but with very different outcomes. So in the UK and around the world, we saw that people from marginalised or underrepresented groups had worse outcomes when it came to suffering and dying from COVID. We saw the disproportionate impact. And then we saw with George Floyd's murder that actually the brutality and some of the systems that are in place really do make us confront, well, what privileges might we have in how we live and what we do, and how has society been ordered and structured in a way that benefits some and doesn't benefit all. So we saw a real shift, and as a business, we came to realize that the only way we could keep that mission of accelerating inclusion is around inside-out inclusion. And what that means is we help businesses create more inclusive marketing, communications and campaigns that are backed by more inclusive cultures and teams within businesses. And all of that is underpinned by data and insight. And I'm going to talk about a bit of insight that people can take away today. And the reason why we work in those areas is that marketing and communications is so key. Like, it's what we see in the world, it's what we see around us, it's how we're communicated to, and it's often how culture evolves. And then cultures inside businesses are the question that you raised, Rebecca, of how do people feel when it comes to the inclusion level within their business. And there's, a scale from 1 to 10, not feeling very included might feel like, well, you're really good at your job, but you just don't feel like you belong where you're working. And that can cause real internal conflict. Or it could be you're really included and that helps you to thrive and that helps you to succeed. You're around people who are like you, or people who understand you and you understand them, and then you have a really different experience in the workplace. So we spend a lot of time trying to work that out and working with organizations on how do we navigate our way through this. What we've also learned is lots of clients would love a silver bullet and a playbook of just go off and do these 10 things and it would be fine. And because culture is so nuanced, that doesn't work. It has to be more about certain principles, certain ways of thinking, some processes to put in place, but applying them really to the fabric and the differences within an organization. So we work with the likes of Unilever around the world to look at how they do their marketing, how their leaders can become more culturally confident. We work with Macmillan, for example, in the UK around, again, how to deconstruct the marketing process and really blend inclusion into the ways of thinking and calling in different elements and different backgrounds of people who might not be part of the process already. And we work with, for example, Penguin Random House on helping to coach and train marketing and comms teams to really feel like they've got the vocabulary and the confidence to talk to colleagues about decisions that are being made around marketing communications. And all of that is delivering what we call cultural confidence. So that's that ability to navigate different cultures, people who are different, and the impact that the cultural wars and cancel culture can have within the culture of a business. So that's kind of how I've gotten to where I am today and what we do. I'll just talk a little bit about research, and then Rebecca, I'm sure there's questions and things that we can go into. But one of the things that we have learned is that people feel quite confused about diversity and inclusion at the moment, and not confused because they don't want to do something about it, but confused because it's, well, what should I do about it and how do I make some change? So we put out a report earlier this year called the Diversity and Confusion Report, which you can find on our website, and I think Rebecca's just put in the chat. And that report looks into various elements of how we've landed into this state of diversity and confusion. So I'll just talk you through some of the findings and then we can go to questions. So one of the things that we found was around language, and do we know the language that we should use at the moment? Now, language is ever evolving. I think if you picked up a dictionary today and thought, right, I now know how to speak a language, just wouldn't be the case. It's about how do you adapt and how do you work, and new words of the years are coming out all the time. I think Collins Dictionary put out yesterday that one of their new words is neo-pronoun, which is using different pronouns that aren't gendered, for example, and that language is constantly changing. So what we found in our report is that people don't know how to talk about race, ethnicity, and sexuality, particularly at work. So we found that people are actually more comfortable talking about death with their colleagues than they are about race and ethnicity. And we found that so shocking. I think, Rebecca, your eyes went open because death is like the final taboo of what we talk about, and how have we gotten there? In part because it's the repercussions. And I can talk about that in the questions. We also found that 40% of working professionals in the UK are afraid to say the term black, so use catch-all terms instead. And it's okay to use catch-all terms. They serve a purpose. But it's going, well, why do we think that? And often it's because, well, actually the history of the term black, the politicization of that term, it does have a nuance in there. So to just use it so openly, people don't feel comfortable with. So, is it, the point there is, well, should we feel comfortable? How do we get there? What do people want to be referred as? How do we have a more nuanced conversation? We also heard that people are afraid to say the term gay, lesbian, disabled in the workplace. Again, it's, should I say it? We hear this a lot. Should I say people of colour now, or what do I do? And 1 in 6 fear that they could lose their job if they get certain terms around race and ethnicity wrong. So it's because of that repercussion, and I think because we're reading in cancel culture and we're seeing people losing their jobs for that we're going, oh, okay, what do I do? And I think if you're from a marketing communications background, fear is one of the biggest things that stops creativity, because we then don't go into a more creative territory that needs us to bounce around against each other and needs us to collide. So that bit about language was really, really insightful for us. And we found that also, rather than using the terms, people would just rather use the wrong term than say what they mean. So a key example of this is the term diverse and diversity. We hear this a lot where people say we need to be more diverse. And our question back is often, well, what do we mean by diverse? Do we mean through the lens of gender? Do we mean that through the lens of ethnicity? Is it actually background and class? What do we mean by diverse? And I think what's happened is diverse and diversity has been coded for as a term, and then people go, I'm not going to really ask what we mean by that. We'll just say we need to be more diverse. And I think I always would like to encourage people to say, actually, we need to open this up and debate it and see what's inside it to know what we should do. And I think where I'll end, and we can go to questions, is to say, well, why does this matter? Well, it matters because we're at a point in time where we're rethinking quite a lot. We're rethinking how we work. We're rethinking where we want to spend our time. I think there's not one person I've spoken to who hasn't said, oh gosh, why am I spending all this time commuting somewhere or traveling somewhere where I just could have been at home and spent more time with my children or spent more time with my pets, my family. I think we're going through this real sense of rethinking, and as much as people want to go backward and say, no, it's just as it was, I don't think it can be. I think we've all collectively lived through something, and we've lived through a time where we've got an opportunity to embed that and think about how we want to do differently. So where we got to was that in our research, we found that 88% of people agree that this is important, that diversity and inclusion is vital, but less than half of people engage in it. And Rebecca, we might see that with the questions, for example, that people don't want to ask questions for fear of saying something wrong, which is why I find these talks fascinating, because you kind of have to break the ice through that. So that was a bit of a, I guess, potted history of how I got the title that I've got and do what I do, how the business got set up and what we do now, which is all around inside out inclusion, and then what we found in the data for anyone who wants to get some actions and explore it further. Then that link is a good place to start. So that's me, Rebecca.
That's amazing. And yeah, I am absolutely blown away by the fact that people would rather talk about death than talking about race and sexuality. That is absolutely blows my mind. So let's go to the poll and see kind of how people are reacting. So I'm just going to end the poll now. So I can see that we've got kind of the majority of people feel very included, which is good. However, we have got a small portion of people who are nearer the 2, which is edging towards not included at all. So I think it's really difficult, and I'm sure, Asad, you've got kind of plenty, you've probably seen this in your own report where people say, lots of people do feel included, but also like it's those few, if there are only a few people who don't feel included, there's still a problem. There's still, that small minority are actually more important than the majority.
Yeah, and I think we often do polls like this where we run workshops for teams to go, well, what is it that makes someone say a 4 or a 5 out of 5? Like what are the aspects of the culture that make people feel like they are included within their business or where they work? And then we offer the floor to say, well, what is it about being a 2 that is driving that, and where does that come from? And actually colleagues to then talk about this and say, well, I don't feel like that because these things happen. And then it helps everyone to just understand that. And I think sometimes we don't talk about this enough. And without the data, and this is why we look at insights and data, because it gives you a really objective point of view to say, well, if we've got people at a 2, what does that mean? What that could mean in business terms is they could leave the organization, so you have staff attrition. What it could also mean is that you have to then recruit new people, which costs. What it also means is that there could be a certain type of person that feels in that 2, and therefore there's a system problem that we need to explore. Because what we're seeing with some companies is, well, we need to hire more diversity, we need to get more people in, but it's like a leaky bucket. If you're putting more water into it and it's falling out because people are at 2s and 3s, then you're just spending all that time putting more water in and putting pressure into the bucket. So that's why I like the data, because the data is a tool to have a conversation.
Absolutely. I think it really kind of you hit the nail on the head, very like with the when people do say, oh, we need to be more diverse. It's like, well, actually, like kind of like let's take PR for example. Actually, gender wise, like kind of like there's more women in PR than there are men. Maybe not at the top, but kind of, so what does it mean when we're saying PR needs to be more diverse? We're talking about race. We're talking about social backgrounds. It's like those are the issues. So I think you really kind of hit the nail on the head by saying like, let's just say these words. Let's just have a very blunt conversation and stop trying to kind of not sugarcoat, but kind of use vague terms to kind of catch all. So I can see I've got some questions coming already, but I'm going to go first, I'm afraid, so before we go to the audience. You work with a wide variety of organisations across different sectors. So is there a common question or issue you're asked to help with? And are there any particular industries that kind of struggle more or do better?
Oh, good question. So we get lots of questions. I guess they're sort of themed. So there's one about how do I make my marketing or my advert more inclusive or more diverse. They could be a question of how do I take bias out of the process, or they could be a question around how do we recruit for more diverse people. So it's often that, and then I'm picking going, okay, what do we really mean here, and how are we going to get there? So that's certainly what we see. I would say there are some commonalities, but it's always really unique because of the culture of businesses and who the people are who work within it. And then in terms of sectors, it's really wide-ranging. I would definitely say that in the third sector, for example, there's a real push, and I think that has to do with the fact that people in the third sector generally want to do good. They work for businesses that want to do good in the world. I think that can, with the frame of the Charity Commission and what's going on more broadly in society, that there are challenges there. So we certainly see lots of interest there. We're also seeing more interest from tech companies to say, well, actually, we've got the opportunity to embed algorithms and think about platforms. And so how do we get inclusive earlier on in what we're thinking and what we're developing? So yeah, and every day is really different. I love the spread of different clients that we work with, because it's really interesting to see all the different approaches and look for the themes, but also look for how they vary.
That's amazing. It's really interesting that tech companies are kind of coming to you. I'm really positive, especially because of kind of, I guess, the inherently gendered issue with like algorithms and the fact that they tend to be coded by men and written for men and don't really think about, oh, actually, like women's bodies work differently, and kind of maybe actually they would need those in a health app. And so yeah, that's really, really interesting that kind of they're recognizing that they have a problem and they're trying to do something about it.
Yeah, and I think sometimes those problems, I mean, it's about framing. So I think there's certainly it's a problem, right? Because we want equality, we want more equity in the world, so that creates a problem. But I think also it's about the opportunity to say, how do we reach more people? How do we do more work with more people? And I certainly hear that and see that with companies that are saying, well, often we start from a gendered position, we create for men and for women. And what we're hearing more and more is people say, well, why and how do we do that? Because if you took the gendering away from it, how could you have universal products? And people are more interested in that, and certainly younger generations are more likely to identify as somewhere on the gender spectrum. So I think these conversations are really, really exciting. How you then do the change, that's the harder work. But that's where
I think you're right as well. I think this next generation that are kind of coming up, they are going to be the change makers. They are completely different, certainly from my generation, in kind of what they're asking for and what they won't stand for, in certainly in technology as well. So that's exciting. Right, I'm going to go into another question. I'm aware that we've got 15 minutes left and I can see 3 questions, so I'm going to try and be quick. Fingers crossed. So there's a fine line between representation and tokenism, certainly kind of in advertising and campaigns, but how can agencies and brands get this right? And I'm sorry, that's a hard question.
Yeah, one of the ways to get it right is to define what we mean by it. So when we say representative, of what, of whom, of where, because representative just feels like a very big term. We've got to make it more representative. So if you're running a brand or a campaign that's targeting a certain demographic, is it representative of that demographic, or is it representative of the people you'd like to buy the product? That's a starting point. In terms of actually developing the campaign, it's how can you bring people into the process? So we have a network of culture makers that we work with to say, could you come in and help with the process? Because what we hear, for example, from people within the disability community is, well, it's nothing about us without us. You can't create a campaign for us without us. So bringing people into the process, and there are lots of other companies that do support on that to help bring lived experience into the process. I think that's quite a tactical thing that can happen. And then the kind of higher up bit is to go, well, what is the audience and representation we're trying to strive for? Have we all aligned on that? And therefore we can have a conversation. Whereas sometimes I hear people go, gosh, we're just making a casting decision and we'll do this, versus going, how does that sit and fit with the brand and who we're trying to reach and who we're reaching at the moment. That's I think what people can do.
Yeah, I guess that kind of like, for marketers and communicators anyway, you should be looking at your audience and like, who are they and who are we trying to reach, and kind of mirroring that in a way. So I guess if you kind of start with the very fundamentals of what the role is anyway, you should inherently get it right, because you're doing that kind of due diligence, rather than being like, right, let's just go with the same people we always cast for that advert because we've worked with them before. Fab. Okie doke. So have you noticed attitudes change since you started The Unmistakables? I really hope so. And do you think people are becoming more receptive to change?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think we've definitely seen that. I think as I said, COVID and George Floyd's murder was a point in time. What I worry about is, will people stay tuned in and wanting to make change? I think there are enough people who want to do that. I'm certainly seeing attitudes being more open at a senior level and at junior levels within business. I think sometimes within the middle, it's harder to get traction and engagement. So that's continual work. But certainly seeing attitudes shift and people wanting to try and get it right, or at least learn about it. And there's a curve of change, and not everyone is going to be like way over there by tomorrow. But people want to go, okay, how do I get there? Who do I need to follow? What are the books I need to read? How could I diversify or expand my own horizons? So we do see a bit of change there.
Yeah, it's really positive, and it's interesting that you say about kind of keeping that momentum going, because that it felt like there was a massive surge of kind of activism and kind of action around kind of like during the pandemic, and especially after George Floyd. And it does feel kind of like, how do you keep that momentum going is kind of, it's hard to kind of keep on having those conversations. Like, just because you've read one article doesn't mean the problem is fixed. So we've got to kind of, it's an ongoing kind of challenge. So I think it's hard, but I guess it's kind of just not giving up is the only way to kind of keep the momentum going, really.
Yeah.
Okie doke. So what is one thing we can all do in our organizations to help them become more inclusive?
What is one thing that people could do?
Sorry, they're all hard questions, I'm afraid.
So one thing is to understand where the organization's at. So does the organization have a strategy around diversity and inclusion? Are there policies in place? Is it on people's radars? So finding that out is the first thing, I think, to do. If that doesn't exist, then try and start the conversation. And I think there's a question I can see in the Q&A that says, how do you start conversations with in companies if leadership don't see the problem? I think if that's the world and the company that you live in, it's to say, well, how do I show it and frame it in a way that is in line with what the leadership team is thinking about? So it's often about finding the hook. So if the leadership team is saying, well, we need to, if you work for an agency, we need to win new business. Okay, what are clients asking for when it comes to D&I? We're seeing more and more they want to understand what agencies are doing. So it could be saying, well, this is going to help us to attract new clients if we have a point of view on this and we're able to take a stance and say outwardly what we're doing. If it's within an organization itself that sells things, it could be, well, how do we reach more people? If it's a charity, it could be, or who are the donors that we're not reaching, or who are the beneficiaries that we're not meeting. So I think sometimes it's just really reframing the conversation into something that people care about, because there's always a link between the bottom line and D&I.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really solid, and that, like you said, that very much answers the question that was asked in the Q&A from the audience. I guess just kind of twist it. You're saying the same thing, but you're just kind of putting a slightly different spin on it, so that you're tailoring your message to your audience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's the job we do day in, day out. It's just doing it for D&I. Fab. Okie doke. And then my last question before I go to the audience ones. So we're entering the holiday season, certainly in the UK. So do you have any advice on how we, as both individuals and organisations, can be more inclusive?
Particularly around the holiday season. I mean, one of the we learn so much just as a business and who we are. But I was thinking, we've been talking about, for example, the Christmas party, and actually the organisation of things like that can rely on what we did before. This is how we used to do it. And so we've been thinking, well, how and who might feel included, and how do we make sure that people feel safe as well? There's lots of different questions that I think we're just making time to ask ourselves and not rushing. So I think often it can feel like, gosh, we just need to rush until the end of the year. Like I can feel it in lots of people that I'm talking to, which is like, come on, like we can just see the end in sight because it's been such a long year and such an up and down year. Trying to just create a bit of space to go, okay, like there's things coming. How do we do it differently? How do we do it in a way that's going to include more people? You know, if it's all centered around alcohol, for example, who might feel excluded by that? If it's a certain type of activity, how might that work? Even through the lens of, you know, do people feel comfortable given COVID? That's a lens to look at it through. So just, create a bit of space is what I would try and say this side of the break.
Yeah, I think that's really true, actually. And just say, I think one of the things that I hadn't considered kind of is around safety, actually, kind of, and how people are feeling, certainly around COVID. And then kind of we've had like 2 kind of very prominent like murders of women very recently. So it's kind of taking all of that into consideration, kind of the people that you're working with. So it's not it's a good one, actually. It's a one to think about. But I'm going to go to the Q&A from the audience now, because we've still got a little bit of time left. So what campaigns and brands this year have done really well with inclusion?
So I'm going to be a little bit biased there and talk about Macmillan, just because we work with them, and their Whatever It Takes brand campaign earlier this year was just brilliant. I think it's won lots of awards, and it was really, really considered by everyone who worked on it. So I absolutely loved that. If I had to pick someone that's not a client, I would look at Spotify. I think Spotify do some really interesting work because they really open about where they're at and where they need to get to. And I think that's so refreshing. Lots of people I see within D&I feel like they can't say anything because it's not perfect and it might get cancelled or it might get criticised, whereas Spotify is just very open to say, this is what we've got, this is what we're working on, this is where we're trying to get to. I imagine their Your Year Unwrapped thing is around the corner, where we're all going to learn about what we have listened to. I think that's just such a lovely way of self-expression and really individual. So I really love Spotify. I think we've been looking at the Christmas campaigns and thinking nothing's really stood out. We were reading yesterday about, I think there was an advert in Canada where they showed a gay Santa, which stood out, and often, you know, that gets headlines. But one of the things we certainly saw, just to flip the question around, of a campaign that maybe missed the mark, was the John Lewis advert, because it came out on Diwali. And so that was such a big group of people who were celebrating quite a big festival, and all of Adland and marketing and comms focused on Christmas because it was the John Lewis advert, which just felt like a real miss. It could have waited a day or gone the day before or something. So those are the good ones, and a couple of could do better. Yeah,
it's sometimes just the smallest things, like just checking, just Googling a date can just doing that little check would have made all the difference. On to the next question. So these are all anonymous, by the way. So obviously anybody that wants to ask a question, you don't have to give your name at all. So as you've mentioned before, that is, this isn't a change that can happen overnight, and it requires more work, investment and focused energy over a long period of time. How do you support the organisations you work to think long term, and how do you encourage and support this as continued practice more strategically? They've said, I hope that's clear, thanks. It was.
Yeah, it's super clear. So it's a good question, because the first point I guess is how do you make it a strategic priority? So that comes to what I was saying before, which is, well, what are the leadership team interested in, and how do you gear it into that and make it a priority as part of the business? And then the bit about how do you make it live longer term is, I think there's two things to think about. There's one around doing a vision setting exercise. Where do we want to be? What would that look like? What would that feel like? What are the metrics that we would use as part of that? And then the second thing is to set those metrics and start to align it to KPIs and say, well, if this doesn't hit, what's the consequence of that? Because it gives you something to go back to. So, when we work with leadership boards or trustees, it's saying, well, is this a recurring item on the agenda? Are we continually talking about it? The final bit I would say, and I think could be hidden somewhere in that question, is just about the energy that this takes. Because the change takes time, and we live in a very attention deficit world, we want everything to happen tomorrow, and we want to be able to shout about it tomorrow. And it's making peace with that, but also just finding the energy to celebrate the small wins, to go, actually, we have moved forward slightly. It's not where we want to be, but we've said in our 5-year plan we want to be there, but we're getting there. So that helps keep the energy up.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's really true. Like, especially kind of in, I guess, like PR and marketing, you're very used to kind of like, right, we've done this activity, we've seen this result, kind of, and it's very kind of like instantaneous at times. Certainly when it comes to like social media, for example, it's like you can literally see the likes and retweets kind of coming through in real time. Whereas if you're trying to kind of, I don't know, improve kind of the number of people from like kind of a unprivileged background in your organization, that's not going to happen in real time, and it's going to take longer. So
we get addicted to the dopamine of like, we've done something.
We've got a like, yes, we've won. Cool. We've got 2 questions, so I should be able to fit them in before the end. So do you have any specific advice for producing authentic PR campaigns reaching diverse audiences, or any you thought have been impactful?
So the key word there is authentic. So I think sometimes in the campaign development process, people can get attached to trends and who can we work with and who's the latest influencer, or where do we go with it? And I think it's just crucial to strip it all back and say, what's the story, who's telling it, and do they have a right to tell it? And sometimes when you start from that place, you just build the story, because it's just so easy. And so I remember when in a previous world I worked with HSBC on their gender neutral titles campaign, and that was all about the fact that you could go into an HSBC branch, and if you were trans, you could change, or non-binary, you could change your gender on your bank account, which wasn't they weren't the first bank to do it, but this process and the person who did the work to train up the call center staff, to train up the branch staff, was someone called Stuart. And we just told Stuart's story of how he went about it, why it was important to him, why HSBC backed an employee who did it. We didn't put loads of bells and whistles on it, just told Stuart's story. So when you call up a journalist or you try to tell it on social, I was like, well, like, some people are going to hate it because they hate the issue, but some people are going to go, what a brilliant story and what a platform we've given. And I think sometimes if brands just think we're there to give a platform rather than own the story and own the voice, then that's how you make change. So I think that's how you get the authentic bit. To reach different audiences, it's again back to that, who are you trying to reach? Are you trying to reach people that you got now, or you want to get? Where are they? How do you get in front of them? The two together work really well.
Awesome. And let's, the last question wraps up the session really nicely, actually. So what are the main lessons you'll be taking forward from 2021?
What are the main lessons? There's a few lessons, I think. One is it's been a really tough year. That's been a really good lesson, and I think it's just remembering that sometimes you can't be in control of what's going on, but that I don't think that's what the question is. The question is, what are the main things that you can do? I think there's a few things. So you can involve everyone in the process in D&I. That's really, really important. If not everyone's involved, then you fail because you've not reached inclusion. I've really learned about navigating my own space in this and thinking about who am I and how does that impact my own bias and what I bring. And then I think the other lesson is really listening. Just taking that time to go, like, just stop my voice, just stop that and hear what people really are feeling. Those have been some key lessons. There are a whole load more lessons at the end of that report that you link to, but those are just 3 that really stuck out for me.
That's amazing. Thank you for nodding around to everybody that could attend and that couldn't attend, so that they will, I don't know why that just popped up saying recording in progress, but it was recording the whole time, don't worry. So you'll get it, and I'll pop the link to the report in there as well so that as many people get the opportunity. We'll also put it on our Access Matters page as well so that as many people as possible can see it. I think it's been a kind of a lovely mix, this session of kind of being like kind of really insightful, but also really practical and like kind of some really great takeaways. And the one thing that I've taken is kind of like getting people involved, people making sure you've got the representation and having those different voices in the conversation, so that, and listening, which is always something that I know I could do more of. So definitely maybe a New Year's resolution. But thank you so much for your time, Asad. It's been fantastic.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us. Like I said, the recording will be sent round probably next week. But yeah, have a good day, everybody, and take care.